Today's guest is Beth Martin. She is a UX design and CX subject matter expert in digital services at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Beth is also a board member of Federal Innovators Salon. And Beth and I have gotten to know each other just over time at networking events here in the DC area. And I find it incredibly important to connect with fellow government people whenever I find them. So, Beth, it's been great getting to connect with you and getting to know you. And thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a real honor.
So, for those who haven't met you, had a chance to just interact with you, talk a bit about yourself. Talk about where you're from, who you are, and what you do.
Well, I'm originally from West Virginia. I moved to the DC area in the 90s after graduate school. Um, I got my first taste of what it's like to work in government and be in DC when I had an internship at the Smithsonian right after graduating high school. I worked at the Museum Reference Center, which is on the mall in the castle.
Hmm.
Actually, I'm sorry, next door to the castle. Um, but it was a really great opportunity because it got me out of my home state, and I got to explore. I mean, I'd been at sleepaway camps and things like that when I was in high school and younger, but this was my first real opportunity to really be on my own and do some adulting, which was a lot of fun. Um, Things were pretty cool back then. We stayed in a dorm on the George Washington campus near the Foggy Bottom Metro, and they gave us $100 a week. And where we were staying was paid for, and we could buy food and transportation on the metro, and it was really, really cheap in the late '80s to do that. Um, and then a family member said, "Gee, wouldn't it be really great if you could get a job working in government in Washington, D.C.?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's never going to happen." And little did I know, maybe 20 years later, that would come true. Um, my first government job, aside from the internship, was a summer that I had in grad school, um, working for the Forest Service. The the local branch was setting up a gypsy moth library, which sounds grander than it really is. It just was a converted closet, and they needed somebody who had access to the university library system so that I could photocopy articles and do interlibrary loans and then photocopy the book chapters. So I did that for the summer, and that actually will help me graduate. I'm sorry, that will actually help me retire whenever that happens 2 months early because of the summer that I spent. So it really pays to make sure to document all of your federal experience because it will benefit you. Um, while I was in grad school and in college, I had some experiences that came into play later on in my professional career. I worked at a place called the Job Accommodation Network, which is based out of West Virginia University. That was created in 1990 when the first President Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I had a really wonderful experience working there for a year. They hired me because they needed someone to work the evening shift from 4 to 8 who spoke French and English because I was working on my master's in French at the time. I was also in the education department, and I ultimately obtained my master's in education, but I got my bachelor's in French. And the experience at Jan was very enlightening because it was an information referral service for employers of people with disabilities. And we had people there who had disabilities. So, I had wonderful exposure working with folks of all different types of disabilities with all different levels of disability. And we also were using adaptive equipment. So I would answer the TDD whenever we would have somebody call. Sometimes they were in French, sometimes they were in English because we had a contract with Canadian government. So they needed coverage and they needed the bilingual. During the day, there was somebody there who was bilingual who answered the hotline, but I was there to answer in the evening. I worked with a gentleman who had been born blind since birth. Um, And I worked with him and I would read his email. He had a problematic software. So sometimes it was just easier just to read the email and then write up the response and then email on his behalf. But normally that would not be done. But that experience informed my professional career when I came to the DC area. And my first consulting job was on a contract for the Patent and Trademark Office as a database administrator, um, managing a library database for interlibrary loan, which speaks to my background because when I graduated with my bachelor's in French, I was still in the education program. I was studying to be a French teacher and a school librarian, but my major was originally computer science, and I had provided tech support in the library system. I had a part-time job working in the library. So all of this comes to play later on in my professional career, and here it is working on a contract, managing a library database. This was before we had point and click. This was a command line interface on a Unix box. It was very basic. This was mid 90s. So I went from working on that contract to a different consulting agency where we had contracts with Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Defense. These were clearinghouses. One was for a child abuse and neglect prevention clearinghouse, and another one was a substance abuse treatment evaluation. So very, very different, but the platform was the same. So I was managing the library database, but I also started to develop some level of expertise. I joined professional associations to learn about program evaluation, and I took early classes, early distance learning classes, when distance learning was through email. And I learned a lot about psychology through programs that were free through Brown University. They were running these pilot programs. So I learned about concepts in substance abuse treatment, and I learned about program evaluation. So my curiosity was very helpful because ultimately I was doing literature reviews in these library databases that I was managing, and I would write overviews of the literature, and that would be attached to the library, to the report. And then sometime in the late 90s, I said, hey, there's this thing called the internet. Wouldn't it be cool if we made available for people to be able to download these reports that we spent time printing up and binding and making look very nice? We use these materials in training, technical training that we provided on the contract. So I taught myself HTML, and I know that my webpage is still out there on the Wayback Machine, and it's not too bad representation of the kind of work that I could do now. But I taught myself HTML and I created this, and then when the contract came up for recompete, they required that the website be a part of the deliverables. So that made me feel good that something I came up with was something that other people found useful. And of course, now we have the internet and the InnoTubes and all that sort of good thing. But going back to the reason why I taught myself HTML, I was in the IT department as a database administrator, but eventually that went over to a different platform and somebody else had been hired to manage that. But along the way, I was still a developer. I taught myself HTML, and then we were using something called Cold Fusion. And my teaching background, I neglected to say that I was also teaching French in grad school. I did that for a year, and then I was working at JM. As I was teaching myself HTML, my organizational skills as a librarian came into play because back in the day, webmasters did everything. They created the content, they created the architecture, they named things, and websites were a technical function, or were treated as a technical function, vastly different than things are now. And my colleagues would come to me for help to organize their content. Well, that's called information architecture.
Yep.
And my colleagues were coming to me for help to make their sites compliant to something called Section 508. That's accessibility. Because I had the background working at JAN, and I knew why it was important that we include alt tags and that we name things certain things, and we don't say click here, that we have an action item, a call to action for those links. So my job went from being a coder to collaborating with my colleagues to training them on the job. And then my best friend who was working at the company went to go work for a consulting firm that did just usability testing. And she said, you've got to come here. So I went there and I learned about usability testing. And then everything came to play. And I was there for a couple of years. And then there was this really great opportunity to go work in the federal government to help stand up something called usability.gov. And that was just the perfect opportunity. And my mentor and my boss, that was his brainchild. And nobody had done anything like this before. We published the second edition of the research-based guidelines book. It's downloadable as a PDF, but we were doing a dog and pony show and we were handing out free copies. And we were explaining to people why it was important to make your sites usable, not only accessible, but usable. And then he went to the Food and Drug Administration from Health and Human Services, and I followed him. And then we did something amazing. We wrote a memo saying we're going to be one FDA, one Food and Drug Administration. You know, again, in the early 2000s, things were still a Wild West. We went from say, hey, I made a web page to now you can do things on the web on our web page. You can't really follow through on a transaction, but you can see what we do. And before the rules had really required that things that websites owned by the government be a .gov or a .mil or a .edu, they were .org, .net, .com in some cases, and they started to crack down on that. So there were a lot of websites that were FDA properties, but were .gov, or some of them might have been a .gov, .org, .net. And so we brought them under one FDA. So it was going to be FDA.gov. And this memo that was signed by the commissioner, who's the head of the Food and Drug Administration, signed this memo, and that gave us our marching orders. And it was a really unique experience to bring all of these websites under FDA to look at the workflow, to break down silos, and to have organizations collaborate who didn't necessarily collaborate. And we were deconflicting content and content ownership in the workflow. And since we were in the Office of Communications, some of the content would come to me to be deconflicted because there were multiple owners. And so to keep things on an even keel, they would send their content to me or to somebody else in the office. We would stage it, and then we would make sure that there was no heartburn, that if we updated some content, that it didn't negate or it didn't cause, harmful information or misinformation to be put out there. So that was a wonderful experience. And then they moved us to the Silver Spring campus, and then my commute became untenable. It went from 20 minutes from where I am now up to Rockville, Maryland, to 30 minutes to sometimes 90 minutes one way. And that just was untenable. And this was before we were teleworking on the regular. So I found a really wonderful opportunity to work at the Federal Aviation Administration. And again, still being in the Office of Communication, we were doing very large efforts, and it was a really great opportunity to have this agency-wide impact and to work on some really interesting opportunities that weren't available through FDA or through HHS. And I was there for about a dozen years, and I got a promotion. So that was really cool. And then 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I found myself at the Office of Personnel Management back in IT, which was a little bit of a culture adjustment, but that was great. Wonderful colleagues at OPM in digital services. And I was really looking for an opportunity that to have the opportunity to have large scale impact. And because anybody who applies for a job, well, most people who apply for a job in the federal government go through USA Jobs. That's an opportunity to have a positive impact. People retire, they have to work through OPM, and we also have the health benefits program. And now we're going to be making available Postal Services health benefits program. So I was really excited to have the opportunity to work on helping to modernize the OPM web presence and also to help with the Postal Services health benefits program. And that will be going live next month. Well, it is live, but there are some wonderful people doing amazing work, and it's just wonderful to be able to have that opportunity to work on some really interesting projects in a different capacity, working from the IT perspective rather than communications.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm very familiar with the communications offices and working with the web teams in those offices as somebody who's in IT myself, especially when I was at USDA. I mean, I wanted to ask a question going way back. So you said your bachelor's was in French and your
Yes,
master's was in education.
yes.
How did you choose those? I mean, what did you have like a career in mind? I mean, now you found a career, right? This career, but did you have something different in mind when you started that?
I did absolutely. I was programming in high school, really enjoyed it. My major when I started as an undergrad was computer science. Again, this was late 80s in West Virginia, in Morgantown. Unfortunately, I was one of a handful of women in the program in the late 80s, and it was not really supportive of women. Um, and I just found more camaraderie,
Hmm.
and I found my comfort zone in foreign languages. There were people there from other cultures, endlessly fascinating and really interesting ways of looking at language. I love linguistics. I love the psychology of learning. So I was taking classes not only in the foreign language department, but also in the education department. Once I changed my major, my family, who was paying for my education, said, "Well, if you're going to do something like that, you might as well do something useful." And so that's how I got into the education program. Um, but that wasn't settling for anything because when I was in high school, I was taking college classes. I had to get my driver's license in order to drive to the local community college. And I was taking French. And on the days that I wasn't in college, I had a couple of morning classes. And on the days that I wasn't taking classes in the morning, I was working in the library of my high school.
Hmm.
And if I wasn't working in the library of the high school, then I was grading papers for my French teacher. So, sort of setting the stage for myself early on. So, somehow made technology and education and library sciences my thing. That was what was working for me. When I was in the graduate program, the dean of the foreign language department said, "We have a bunch of incoming freshmen, and I'll pay you to teach and I'll pay for you to go to school." And I'm like, "Yes, please sign me up." So I graduated my junior year because I had been taking, 20 hours a semester. So I just needed a few classes to round out for that summer. So in the fall, I started teaching French to freshmen who were just a couple years younger than me, which was very, very strange. But that was a good experience. Just standing up on stage and acting like I know what I'm talking about. That was a good life experience. But my plan had been once I finished my education program, I had been working in the university libraries. There was the downtown campus and the medical campus, and I was working at both. And I loved working in the library. I did reference desk, I did circulation, government documents, which I hated, but I still did it. Interlibrary loan. I did all of the jobs, and I really enjoyed working the reference desk because people would come in, and there was like this treasure hunt every time somebody came in looking for something, whether it was a freshman going through um, the course, Introduction to Library Science or something like that, or graduate student trying to find some obscure reference. All of it was interesting, and I was providing tech support because we had to set up the terminals, and the terminals would break down, lose connection, whatever. And this was back in the day when one terminal was one database.
Right.
If you wanted newspapers, you would go to this one terminal. If you wanted to check, uh, you know, um, a journal, a series of journals, you go to another terminal. So I would do that. So um, yeah, I thought I'm going to get a job at at the library once I finish graduation. I'm just going to get a job, a regular job, and that job, if I remember correctly, paid $13,500, which was nearly twice as much that I was making as a graduate assistant working at JAN. That was like $7,500, and it was $5,000 as a teaching assistant, graduate teaching assistant. So that was raking in the big bucks. But the benefit of working as an employee of the university was tuition assistance. And
Ah,
if I my plan was to get my master's in library science because I'd already passed the certification to be a school librarian and a French teacher from K to 12. I'm sorry, fifth grade through 12th, school librarian from K to 12. I could get in-state tuition at Penn State, which was practically free, with the tuition assistance through WVU. That was my plan. That was a 2-year master's program, and then I would just be an academic librarian someplace.
huh.
That was my plan. And if I had to do it over again, maybe I would be an academic librarian. In my retirement, I might do that. But now I'm thinking I am still interested in how people learn, but more about the decisions that they make
Mm,
after they learn something. So, behavioral psychology, behavioral economics, and how can we use that knowledge to help people, when we consider how we're serving the public, through customer experience, through digital experience.
yeah.
How can we use that to provide better service?
I can completely see how your education uh, fully supports what you do with CX and UX because there is such a large um, thing for those where you need to understand how to convey things, right? How people are going to receive what you're conveying, right? I mean, I remember classic website days like you when I learned HTML and tried not to use the blink tag because it was obnoxious, right? And figuring out how do I present content in a way that's meaningful, helps people find what they're looking for, because of course we didn't have great search tools back then. But how do you structure something for people to use it in a way that gets them, a meaningful interaction? I totally can see how education, as somebody who's got an education as an educator, that's like perfect storm there. Plus your background with computer science and programming. Uh, I wish I had thought of that. Yeah, as an educational method, I could completely see that. And I think I love that when you may not have considered that, like many people would not have considered, oh, this is the path I'm going to take for this career. But once somebody has done it, you go, oh, that would be an interesting way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, going back, it looks like it was very, very well thought out. Like experience, which will apply to this, and but it's more like shoots and ladders.
Yeah.
I found myself in this, and then I was very, very fortunate along the way to have a few people who said, "Oh, you should take this class," or provide me with opportunities to take, took me under their wing and provided me with opportunities and gentle guidance. And those few people who really mentored me, whether they knew it or not, formally or informally, really provided, you know, just sort of redirected me. And that's that was pivotal. And I'm thankful that I was aware enough and fortunate enough to run into these people in my life.
Hmm.
And some of them are still in my life. Some of them have passed away, but to have those people in my life who um, were just so kind and generous with their time and opportunities that they provided me, that it I would still probably be a librarian. I probably would have done that. I mean, not that it's second best, but if I hadn't moved to DC, if I hadn't taken that first job, if I hadn't met a person, who sort of gave me this opportunity and, told me to take this or that class, I wouldn't be where I am now. And, I'm a very big proponent of mentoring. And when you get to a point in your career, it's okay to step back and let other people take on those opportunities and
Hmm.
not to hoard them for yourself, because you're not doing anybody any favors. We've got so many people in the federal government who are new to federal or even civic service. And we need to be those people that we needed in our careers to help the next generation, because you know there are so many old people in government,
There
you
are.
know, and there
Yes.
are so few young people in government that we need to be that bridge and give them that institutional knowledge that we have, or that awareness, or to make a suggestion. It's up to them whether or not they want to accept it. But young people are at a disadvantage for a lot of different reasons, and it's really incumbent upon us who have those opportunities to make those opportunities and say, here's a really cool thing, would you be interested?
Hmm.
Then welcome aboard. I think that that's really, really important.
Totally agree. I do a lot of volunteering with early career people, and I really try to promote consider government service, consider government service. Even if you want to go back and work in industry again, consider a stint in government service, and maybe we'll even keep you. You may want to not leave. And I
Right.
celebrate those opportunities. There's been a few over my career that been able to, see go, oh, I think I will do that. In fact, a friend recently started at the Department of Commerce, and so she's diving in and trying to figure out what it means to be on this side of the fence, if you will. And but I agree with you. We're aging. Our population is getting closer and closer to retirement age. All it takes is, some situation where they're like, "Yeah, that's it. I'm done," and they can be
Yeah.
gone.
Right. And you can't blame them for working at a job for a couple of years and finding a new one, because that's how people get raises and promotions.
That's right.
And um, you know, on the side, I coach people about uh, getting their resume prepared for federal job applications. And when they have skin in the game, they own it. And
Hmm.
demystifying what it's like to work in government and where you can find information to help you educate yourself. Again, they need to take the effort in order, because nobody's going to hold them to it unless they want to do it. They have to be motivated. And intrinsic motivation is very underrated. um, but if you can demystify it and say, here are the places that you can go to learn about it, and here are the resources that are available for you that are written in plain language that make it approachable. And the coming into government right now is um, probably a lot more desirable than in some public sector opportunities, because there there are different ways of how the government operates. Some people may be on a faster timeline, and working as a consultant is a way to dip your toe in the water, and maybe you want to convert to a government job at some point. Um, but uh, you know, here's the opportunity to have an impact that you won't get in the private sector, that you can see things from the 30,000 foot, and you can be involved in that. Whereas, if you're working on product, or if you're working as a consultant, you're only working on a small slice. And
Yeah.
for some people, that's really important. And even if they only work a few years in government, if they go back into the private sector, they have that broader awareness. And I think it also helps to build an understanding of what government is, little g government, not big G government, and to restore trust.
Mm.
Adam Conover, who's a comedian, did a short-lived TV series called The G Word, and I think that was really important because it explained in plain language what government did, what it does, and I think people don't realize that the weather comes from government.
Mm.
And yes, we know about the air traffic controllers, but there are many other things that government does that people aren't aware of. So I think having that awareness, a little bit of inside baseball is really helpful to appreciate that there are many good things and that you know we can all be a part of it somehow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Beth, when you look back over your career, and you see the experiences you've had, what's something or more than one something that you go, man, I wish we did that differently. It could be more efficient. It'd be more helpful to people. And I'm going to caveat that to say, it's not something we'll come up with that innovation maybe on the next way to do that thing today, but we're going to get people to start thinking about it. And what's one or more things that you think about when you look back?
I wish that I had been more thoughtful about my federal career.
Mm,
Um, to be honest, like I said, retrospectively, you can connect the dots, and it really was like shoots and ladders. I wish that early on, something like the IDP, the Individual Development Plan, that had been promoted to us,
mm,
and that mentoring was available early on, not just for the seasoned professionals, who are in a leadership capacity, but for young people to have a buddy. A lot of agencies do that. They'll connect, especially since we work, in hybrid situations.
right.
We need somebody to have water cooler moments with. We need somebody who knows where to find things and people and resources. And if you're working remotely and you're a new person, you don't know what you don't know, and you might feel left out. And that's not really conducive to team building and to making people feel welcome. So I wish and I hope for that modern government takes a look at ways that we can help the new people feel more welcome. And there are some agencies that do a really good job of that. And I've been very fortunate to be exposed to some of that. Um, and to set up the one-on-one meetings, especially if you're working remotely, and to encourage building connections with your peers outside of your local team, across your agency, and to forge networks across government. Digital.gov, which is a property owned by GSA, the General Service Administration. There are lots of communities of practice, and I really
Yeah.
like that idea that there are communities. So I can join a antiquated listserv on user experience and another antiquated listserv on customer experience. And we can have conversations and we can chat, and I can set up a call with somebody to help answer their question. And we've had virtual meetups, and they call them huddles, and we've had seminars and summits. And there are these amazing things that once you become part of these communities of practice, they make you feel like you're a part of something and you're not just the lone practitioner.
Mm. Wow, I love that suggestion. As somebody who came into government after I had a career, I completely agree with you that transition is difficult at times to understand just even things like the benefits and how what your paycheck's going to be because of everything they take out of it. People don't realize there's extra things that come out of it when you're a government to pay to kind of cover the pension and And then how to craft, how do you purposely craft your career journey? You're right, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions that are still carrying over from previous generations of loyalty to one place and only loyalty to one place, and not considering that sometimes, like you said, to get a promotion, you have to leave. To get another opportunity that will expose you to more uh, uh, things that are going on and how the government services the public, right? I'm on my fifth federal agency. I loved every mission that I got exposed to. And I love that as an IT person, I can work at different agencies and learn the mission of of each agency and buy into it, right? Get that buy-in where I'm like, yes, I'm all for this mission. But also, like you said, I have to worry about my own career and look for opportunities for promotion, for things that'll expose me to something new. If, maybe a job that's more innovative than support and standardized. So, wow, yeah, I know OPM has a lot of great resources, and some agencies do as well, but there's lots of gaps.
Yep. OPM has USA Jobs, and one of the outgrowths of that, there are virtual student internships. They're
Yeah.
not paid, but if you're not able to find an internship, nearby where you are, the opportunities are 10 hours a week for an academic year.
Hmm.
And it's just as valid an internship as, any other internship, but it's remote. So, you can be working on a project in DC and you could be out in California.
Wow, that is so
And
amazing. Things like that didn't exist in my mind before COVID, and those opportunities are so great. My son, who was in a scholarship program that required him to get internships with government agencies in the summer.
wow.
I was able to work with our HR my last agency and get him an opportunity at my last agency, mostly because they didn't pay. It was a non-paid internship, and so there was no conflict of interest. He didn't work for me; he worked for somebody else, right? It's whatever. They covered his transportation costs, so he could get there and back, and it was part-time. But you're right, virtual would have been so much better. That is a great idea for somebody who
Oh,
can't get the fully paid internship that, provides them enough money for housing and everything.
well, hopefully, at some point they'll prioritize that and make those internships paid. But there's also details that you can apply for,
Yep.
and something you might even consider as a micro detail, through open opportunities.
Hmm.
So if you or somebody who's listening or watching to this, who wants a detail, you can ask for one. You can apply for one. Details can be, paid or non-paid. And you have to have your manager's approval, of course, but those are ways that you can get those opportunities. There are rotations. I did a
Hmm.
formal 6-month reimbursable detail with GSA working in the Office of Customer Experience. I also did a detail with GSA probably about 7 years ago, I think it was, as part of a rotation through the President's Management Council
Yep.
for interagency rotations. Those are not paid, they are reimbursable, but those are different than a detail. But there are lots of opportunities for leadership and for personal and professional growth. The Partnership for Public Service has some
Yep.
really great leadership development programs. Those didn't exist back in the day. But my rotation at GSA working at performance.gov was in person, but my detail with GSA Office of Customer Experience was virtual.
Hmm.
And I've had virtual interns that I've worked with. So there are just so many opportunities, and having a Sherpa or that buddy or that resource in your office who can help guide you, along with a manager who says, I know that you want to do this because I've seen your IDP and we've talked about it. Here's a really great opportunity. Those kinds of people you need to have in your life as well.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss because I'm a big fan of ACT-IAC. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but I did the ACT-IAC leadership development programs, and they are fantastic. I equally have done a public partnership for public service as well, and I've participated in a lot of their events. Yeah, you're right. I mean, sometimes you got to look beyond the agency you're currently at to see what other opportunities there are in this space. And yeah, it's that's how you grow. That's how you meet people. That's how you network.
Well, and then when it doesn't exist, you make your own.
That's right.
So, you know, if you're a federal employee and you're interested in customer experience or user experience or digital experience, and you want to mentor or be mentored, I'm part of a group of folks who co-founded a peer mentoring program. So we have right now through October 11th, we have an application period open
Huh?
for people to apply to be mentors or mentees. And, you know, we do this because we didn't have anything available to us. And this will be our sixth cohort.
Wow.
So we've had about 200 people go through the program, and people come back and they're mentors after being a mentee. And it's really amazing the caliber of folks who volunteer.
Wow,
Um,
that's an amazing program. I'll have to make sure I put a link to it or information on it. So you never know if maybe not this cohort, but maybe the next cohort, because it sounds like it's very successful. That's pretty awesome.
yeah, yeah, and it's independent of any agency, and we do encourage people, to look at their IDPs and individualized development programs, and use this as an opportunity for growth.
Hmm.
And it runs about 5 months from November to March or thereabouts.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Beth, is there anything coming up for you in the near future besides, I guess, running this cohort once the time frame stops? Anything else going on for you?
Oh, I've got a few irons in the fire, but I'm always up for networking with folks, and like I said, for folks who are interested in becoming federal employees, or even just working in the public sector. I'm always interested in helping people understand what it's like, and to demystify it and make it a friendly and welcoming place. So I'm always happy to talk with folks about that.
Awesome. Well, Beth, this has been a great conversation. It's great to get to know you and hear more about your background and the things that are exciting for you and the things you are trying to accomplish. And so I look forward to seeing how that works out for you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation to talk with you and your audience.